Not cool. Cool. Walk around.
Okay, welcome everyone. This is the 15th regular meeting of the Government Transition Advisory Committee. Today is Tuesday, December 5th, and we will be here from 6 to 8 p.m. My name is Julia Meyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Engagement and Community Participation Manager for the transition. Our co-chairs, Jose and Leah, will facilitate tonight's meeting. Next slide, please. Before we get started, I'm just going to take a minute to go over some meeting logistics. This is a hybrid meeting. The meeting is being recorded for later viewing and being live streamed on our YouTube channel. A copy of the recording will be posted on the city's transition webpage under past meetings and events. For today's meeting, we have closed captioning, American Sign Language, and Spanish language interpretation available. To access Spanish interpretation, please click on the globe icon at the bottom of the screen and select Spanish. To access closed captioning, click on the CC button on the bottom of your screen. Committee members, please take this time to change your chat settings to everyone so folks listening today or following along can see the chat. The meeting chat does become part of the public meeting record. For community members listening in, we have the Zoom Q&A feature available. You can submit questions or comments throughout the meeting. We may not always be able to answer all the questions that you submit, but your questions and comments also become part of the public meeting record. At today's meeting, we will be taking verbal public comment, but as a reminder, folks can submit written public comment at any time through our online comment form or by emailing transition@portlandoregon.gov. With that, I will pass it to Leah to review tonight's agenda.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Tonight's agenda includes committee business, public comment, committee engagement updates, city code alignment with the new charter, transition expenses to date, and fiscal year 2024 to 2025 budget development, and finally, our very first subcommittee reports. Before we adjourn our meeting today, we will close with a brief overview of next steps. Next slide, please. Okay. Brian and Joe are unable to attend tonight's meeting. Otherwise, we expect full attendance. We need to approve 2 meeting summaries tonight for November 1st and for November 15th. They were distributed to everyone last week. So I'll start with November 1st. Could I get a motion to approve the meeting summary? So moved. Juliet moves. Could I get a second? Second, right? All in favor? Quick show of hands. Great. Okay, now could I have a motion to approve the November 15th meeting summary? Motion by Amy Randall. Second? Second by Destiny. All in favor? Great, excellent. And as mentioned at our last couple of meetings, tonight we get to do something very exciting, which is to appoint the next co-chair rotation. Not that we haven't loved it, we have. Jose and I would stay forever, but we think it should be shared amongst all of us. Next slide, please. Thank you. As a reminder, the responsibilities of the co-chairs are in our bylaws and are on the slide that you see now. Destiny and Zach have volunteered to step up to serve as our next co-chairs. We could not be more excited. The next co-chair rotation will begin chairing meetings in January of 2024. Co-chair rotations are approximately every 3 months. Jose and I are going to be here to help onboard the new co-chairs with the support of Julia and June. And as I said, I'm really excited to bring them on. We're very confident that they're going to do a great job. Could I get a motion from someone to appoint Destiny and Zach to be our next co-chairs?
So moved.
Hey. We got a second from Juliet. Show of hands, all in favor. Excellent. Thank you. I am very excited to say motion carries, and we have two new co-chairs that will be joining us in January. Thank you so much for stepping up to this, Destiny and Zach. With that said, before we go on to our working agreements, Jose and I wanted to take a moment to share some of our reflections about serving as co-chairs. I'll get things started and then pass it off to you, if that's okay. So first off, I'll just say the obvious, which is that this has been really fun. I don't know if that is obvious. I don't know if everyone thinks that co-chairing a government committee would be a good time, but it truly has been. The staff has been wonderfully supportive, and I think that's something I want to note, that we're incredibly lucky to have great staff. Reflections in terms of what it's been for us to be here. When we came in, we had one pretty simple goal, which was to try to get full committee participation. I think we've done a pretty good job of hopefully inviting more people to speak up without forcing people to speak beyond their comfort zone, hopefully. And we hope to continue to do more of that. Thank you for your grace and patience as we've tried out some different things to get people to engage more or less and make sure that all of us are stepping up with it. The other thing that I wanted to say that I noted in the process of over the past 3 or so months of us being here is I've noticed us having a bit of a good time together sometimes, which I think is notable to say, just because with any teams that I've worked with before, I think when we're able to have some lightheartedness and share some joy together, we do better work, and we also inject hopefulness into the process. So I just want to thank you all for that, and that I think that we're doing good, serious work, but that also we've managed to find a balance and that we can have a good time with each other while doing it. So thank you. Jose?
First, I'll say it again. Thank you to the staff, because they do so much. You see how much they do, and then you become co-chair, and then you realize how much more it is that they actually do. So we couldn't have done it at all without them, or at least not sanely. So I do appreciate them. I want to say that as much as I like what we do here as part of GTAC, I never thought that all the behind the scenes stuff would really speak to me more. It's been really fun to work on the agendas, on figuring out what we're going to talk about, what we prioritize. It's been a good, I don't know. It's been good practice as to how to think and how to see how everyone else thinks, because it's not just about you. It's about doing what the committee is best, and then you get all kinds of feedback. Some you agree with, some you don't, but you have to deal with all of it. So it's a very good exercise in that, and I do suggest that anyone who's even considering it try to do it, because it's really a good experience. I thought I learned a lot. I've learned more being co-chair and being on this committee than I have in a lot of jobs that end up doing the same thing over and over. Here, especially with co-chair, there's so many different types of pieces that you really have to kind of bend your mind to see how this one unrelated actually deals with all these different pieces, and work with all these different people that have experience in a million different things, and everyone wants to talk about something else. Everyone has their one priority, and how to balance that with what the city actually wants to hear from us and how to use their time. So it's been a really good experience, and I hope you all get a chance to do it as well.
Awesome. So thank you again for trusting us to do this. We'll be here still. Don't worry. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide then. And as always, our final order of committee business is to review the working agreements. The working agreements state as follows. 1, in discussion, challenge ideas rather than individuals, offer constructive suggestions. 2, approach different opinions with curiosity, seek to understand. 3, keep the needs and concerns of the local community and the larger region at the forefront of the work. 4, arrive on time and prepared to the best of your ability. Let the group know if you're unable to attend a meeting. The co-chairs will aim to incorporate tools for breathers. 5, keep multitasking to a minimum. 6, keep focus on the objectives of the meetings. Utilize co-chairs to note additional topics for discussions by submitting topics in writing via email. Next slide, please. 7, honor the decisions of the group. 8, contribute to the overall success of the group by finding ways to participate that best meet your needs. 9, step up, step back. Collectively work to ensure that every member who wants to be heard is heard. 10, embrace conflict and work with your fellow committee members and staff to find ways to give each other feedback. The co-chairs will aim to incorporate various feedback tools. 11, use I statements. Thank you. All right, and I'm going to pass it back to Julia to introduce public comment.
Thank you. Perfect slide. So this is the time we have held for verbal public comment. Community members were asked to sign up ahead of time through our website. We have 2 folks who signed up. After those 2 folks testify, we probably have time in this item for 1 more person. So if there's someone in attendance who might like to testify, you can think about it, and I'll ask after the first 2 folks go. Folks have 3 minutes to testify. If you hit that 3-minute mark and are still talking, I will jump in and ask you just to wrap up your thoughts. So we have today Janice, followed by Alan. So Janice, I'm going to promote you to a panelist. Just accept that invite. Thank you, Janice. Welcome. Whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and get started.
Sorry, just trying to see what's happening here. I'll just turn off my video. So Janice Thompson here, speaking only for myself on 2 points. Regarding Emergency Code Title 15, this might be handled later, but my question is, when will Title 15 background information and proposed updates, code updates, be available for public review? I would urge the GTAC to encourage that the public review option be available several weeks in advance of the January 19th comment deadline that's referred to in your material. In Title 15 background material, I would also request that a list of all current programs created via this emergency code be provided. For example, the Street Services Coordination Center indicates that it was created under an emergency declaration back in 2022. Seeing what programs have been created under the current emergency code would provide valuable context and assist the public's review of proposed Title 15 code amendments. In terms of charter transition costs, appropriately, the mayor's first budget guidance memo identifies charter transition as a priority. There will be challenges, however, and so I have 3 context points. One is that the horizontal management structure with deputies managing service areas is new to Portland, but it is a common approach in other municipalities. It isn't bureaucracy. It is modern municipal management that is overdue in Portland. As alluded to in the mayor's budget memo, the time is now to begin to identify cost savings via horizontal management improvements. That management approach with service area and citywide emphasis addresses duplicative practices due to vertical management led by elected officials in the current siloed budgets. Second point is that initial charter transition cost estimates by the City Budget Office, or CBO, were always clearly labeled as estimates in the voters pamphlet and elsewhere. Also, the CBO did not consider possible savings due to ending the commission form of government. A third point, regarding construction projects, there is an existing city policy on identifying confidence levels such that initial cost estimates on big construction projects are typically and appropriately labeled at a low confidence level. Now, charter transition costs are not directly comparable to big construction projects, but that kind of confidence level approach still seems applicable. Indeed, due to the broad scope of charter changes, it seems fair to characterize early CBO estimates as being at a very, very low confidence level. It is not an appropriate financial evaluation practice, therefore, to view them as caps or ceilings. Thank you for your work.
That was perfect timing. Janice, thank you so much. Alan, I see you, so I'm going to promote you to a panelist and just accept that invite when you see it. Hi, Alan. Thank you so much for being here. So same thing, whenever you're ready to get started, just take yourself on mute and you have 3 minutes.
Great, thank you. Thanks for letting me give this public comment. My name is Alan Combs. My pronouns are he, him. I've lived and worked in Portland for over 22 years. I believe this is my first time speaking to GTAC, but I've testified before the City Council numerous times. At the Voter Candidate Education and Outreach Subcommittee meeting held on November 29th, there was an outline of roles and responsibilities on page 12 of that presentation deck. And one of the activities shown was hard to reach voter contract, and it listed activities like ranked choice voting experts, RVC messaging, media strategy, and coalition outreach and management to be staffed by the following firms: United Way of Columbia Willamette, how can I say that? Willamette, of course, Portland United for Change, Democracy Rising, Hearts and Minds Communication. These specific firms immediately raised several questions for me. First, I think the public should know whether these firms are typical or example firms or have actually been awarded contracts. If the latter, what was the process used for selection and when did they receive council approval? None of these firms show in the subcommittee meeting deck that were part of some awards that were made by the City Council back on October 25th, I'll note. Perhaps it's still forthcoming. Second, I'm surprised that one firm, Portland United for Change, is eligible to provide outreach city services to the city. Portland United is a PAC that advocated for adoption of the specific charter reform that was put before the voters last November. Since then, Portland United has taken numerous specific positions regarding unresolved city policies. Its leadership includes individuals that are running for city council in November. One announced candidate is right there on its landing page. Portland United was in June of 2022 warned by the city auditor to be violating Portland campaign regulations. Even if somehow Portland United has a nonprofit arm, perhaps associated with United Way, I don't know, I still see this as a conflict, at least until much further information is provided to the public. Third, I see a mismatch of these firms and the listed task. I'm wondering if any of these firms are actually particularly qualified to be RCV experts or able to reach out to other underserved categories, such as older voters. Older voters are known to vote, but they don't know much about RCV, right? Fourth and last, I'd be curious to know what the overall spending of the expected to these outside firms will be and how success will be measured. At the October 25th meeting of the City Council, where it approved contracts with strategic communication firms that specialize in engaging with underserved communities, I testified by reading into the minutes some of the output from one of the specialized firms, and it was mediocre at best. And that's understandable, except they were paid in the six-figure range. So I ask you, or I urge you, to look carefully at the effectiveness and performance metrics you have in these agreements and make sure they're actually reaching underserved communities. And I do want to say that I think this is an important goal.
I'm really sorry, but you're almost a minute over. Could you maybe just finish your last sentence?
I just want to state that I do think this is an important goal, but I'm really surprised by these firms being selected if that's the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. So at this point, I just want to see if there is anyone else in attendance. We probably have time to take one more. We'd love to get public comment. So if anyone in virtual space would like to offer any comments, you can raise your Zoom hand. And I am going to do an awkward pause for about 5 seconds, just so folks can ponder. And Terry, I see you. I just want to see if one other person. Okay, thank you so much. And thank you so much for the 2 folks who offered public comment. And just as a reminder, you can always submit public comment in writing through our website, by emailing us, or by calling 311. Thank you. And I'll turn it back to Jose.
Thank you. Did we want, Terry, want to say something? Terry, go ahead.
If Janice is still here, I had a question for Janice and her testimony, specifically relating to costs. And you talked about the initial estimates that were given and the confidence levels that were given. And I appreciated those comments. I agree. My concerns have been with the city council and the mayor's staff, and how those estimates seem to be locking in at this point. They are firm. Those estimates have not been identified as low confidence. In fact, they're restricted by a budget note. I'm curious, Janice, you've been following us and giving us good advice for a while. Would you consider those council estimates that were given as low confidence levels, or did you even look at that? If you have any opinion on that, this is just a question I have.
We'll note your questions and maybe we can pass them on. Terry, public comment is not a time for a discussion. So we're going to move on to the next agenda item. Next slide, please. Okay, time for committee engagement updates. I'm going to ask June to share her key takeaways from November 2023 community engagement status update. And then we'll open up to members to share any reflections on recent community engagement efforts. June?
Hi everyone, June Reyes. I use she, her pronouns, city staff. In the chat, I put links to the November public comment report and the engagement status update. I don't think those are links that y'all have had yet. So I'll just do a few highlights before y'all want to share more about the engagement you've been doing. So we had 34 public comments, a little bit less than what we usually get, but I will say that's most of that came from public testimony to council for the November 1st decision on the city org chart. Some things that came up were around clear definitions of roles and responsibilities between the executive and legislative branches. The cost of the org structure came up. Some folks had said it was under-resourced. Some folks felt like it was too complex and cost too much. And I think, as y'all are aware, there also were asks for climate officer. I also want to thank Terry for highlighting this. Encourage folks to look at the end of the public comment report from Michael Veal's comments, who have visited GTAC, I think November 1st, to provide comments. And so to the request to provide additional comments, he sent quite a robust letter to you all. There was also in your briefings and presentations, there's a lot of interest around constituent relations in district offices. We got a lot of questions about the city administrator and the mayor, and also, neighborhood associations and the East Portland Action Plan, for example, were wondering, where do we fit within the city organizational structure? I want to note that we had 15 presentations in November, and given the fact that like 1 week was kind of dead because of the holiday, that was an amazing, really huge push from everyone. So 13 of those were GTAC members, 2 of them were from staff, and really just kudos to you all for going out there and even getting a presentation 3 hours ahead of time that was updated and getting it. So thank you to you all. Those presentations were a great mix. We had 7 neighborhood associations, 2 East Portland focused groups, a PSU class, a business district group, and a consultant group. And before I turn it over to Jose, I also want to note that we'll have some capacity early next year to improve how we report on our public comments and community engagement. And so, continue to keep your feedback for improving how we can, consider public comment coming. And so I'll just end with that.
Thank you, June. And now, before I go on to get the committee members' engagement reflections, I do want to give the Amy Wood and Amy Randall, the opportunity to share, because remember last week you guys had your hands up and then you put them down because we didn't get to you. So I'm putting you on the spot kind of, but you could say that you don't have nothing if you don't have anything.
I have literally nothing to say.
Okay. I just didn't want you guys to
She made-
shout out yet again.
Every single thing.
Amy Wood, did you have something?
I'll only offer one minor note, which is that I have co-presented with Terry 3 times now and have found him to be an excellent partner in presentation. And I think that's a really good strategy to think about as we continue our community outreach, pairing up with someone who excels in a certain part of the transition updates that you might feel weak in. And so I've found Terry to be somebody who can answer some of the tough questions that I'm still getting up to speed on. And so something I'm going to hopefully continue to be able to do is partner up with other folks who have some strengths and are able to answer some of the questions that I might not feel as comfortable answering.
Thank you, Amy. Fred?
Yeah, I just had the pleasure of sitting down for coffee with former state senators Jane and Ron Cease. And of course, Ron is a professor emeritus from Portland State and founded the School of Urban Affairs. Jane insisted that I take with me this. She provides this laminated outline for all newly elected Democratic legislators, especially the women that she's been proponing for. And I understand that Gary Wilhelms likewise has one similar to this for Republicans. I haven't asked Gary for that yet, but it's a good guide for newly elected officials, especially not just legislators, but anyone in a policy position. And I was telling June earlier that this is something to share with the subcommittee dealing with council roles. And I think the effort that we will probably have something to do with after the election and training, how to train the newly electeds. The big takeaways, and I'll pass this around, you can enjoy it. But first, know the process, learn the manual parliamentary procedure, learn all the players, the issues, listen a lot, watch a lot, ask a lot, talk and opine later. And then one of the basics of the Senate, it thinks it's in charge, the House thinks it's in charge, the governor thinks they're in charge, and they probably are, whether they're of the same party or not. And I think that we don't have that kind of a separation of powers, but we will have some between council and the mayor and the manager. And so it's just, there's some great asides here, and especially respecting every other member got there just as you did, elected by voters in your districts. You won't agree with them on everything, some not on anything, but respect the differences. And so it's just good advice. I'm leaving it with whatever subcommittee that is.
Thank you, Fred. Is there anyone else?
Bless their hearts, Jane and Ron. Yeah.
Well, before I move on, I'll just share. Destiny and I presented at the Multnomah County Youth Commission recently in person, which was great. And first of all, let me thank Lori, because I have done a lot of presentations, but they have all been virtual. And this was my first in-person one, and I was kind of nervous. You know, like you don't have your notes, you don't have the things you rely on and get used to having. But I had a short conversation with Lori because done a lot of in-person ones, and she put me at ease really well. And I think it went great. And it was really fun to watch all these really engaged, though you couldn't tell from the face, teenagers. I've worked with a lot of teenagers. That's what I love all the time. But they knew a lot of questions. And even though they don't look engaged, the way you can tell is afterwards they'll come up to you and be like, oh, is this the website you were talking about? And they'll like try to get you, make sure they have the right website. And that happened. Like he came up and asked. So you know they're listening and getting this information, hopefully passing it on to their parents. So it was great. I hadn't thought about presenting to a younger group, but if anyone gets a chance, you should do it. It's a different experience. So anyone else? Okay, well, next slide, please. I will turn it over to Diana Shiplet from the transition team for the city code alignment agenda item.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm Diana Shiplet. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a project coordinator with the transition team. Thank you for having me. My presentation is pretty short, so if you could hold questions till afterwards, that would be very much appreciated. Next slide. So here's just a quick reminder of what's included in the code alignment project. First, any updates to our municipal code needed to match with city charter or the recently approved updated organizational chart. Also, we are doing any updates necessary to remove limiting languages such as racist, sexist, or ableist language. And finally, we're also including some minor updates related to matching new state, federal, or county laws. The fourth bucket originally wasn't part of this project, but we've decided that rather than take some sections of code to council multiple times within 1 year, we just are gonna bundle everything together and align those updates with our updates for simplicity's sake. So thank you. Let's see, next slide. As a reminder, we've updated 3 important sections of code with 3 very different levels of engagement. The first was the ranked choice voting code, chapter 2.08. We completed the update just prior to the work of this committee beginning. Engagement on this code section was limited due to some time constraints. We took input through channels including an online comment form, an online survey, email, calling 311, a community listening session, and a meeting with the, I've just lost the name of the group, the Portland.
Several stakeholders, but convened by the League of Women Voters.
League of Women Voters, that's the name. I was lost there for a second. And additionally, council took testimony. The second section of code was related to the small donors election program. The transition team did not participate directly in the updating of these sections, and it's my understanding that outreach was limited to testimony given at the Portland Elections Commission and the City Council meetings. The third chapter was chapter 3.02, Council Rules and Operations. This was the first chapter where this committee participated in the process. We presented at 2 of your regular meetings, held 1 community education and listening session, and met with a work group of GTEC members. Internally, we additionally met with each of the council members or their staff 3 times, met with multiple staff from the city auditor's office and across a couple of bureaus. And we met monthly with bureau liaisons to the code alignment project. Testimony was also given through our normal means as far as email and calling 311, and it was also brought to city council. Additionally, not listed on this slide, at tomorrow's city council meeting, the city elections office through the city auditor will be bringing updates to Title II chapters regarding election code. As these updates are restricted or are strictly to align those code sections. And the Elections Commission is an independent commission. We did not engage directly with those updates, but remained informed that their process was occurring. I think that there are lessons to be learned from each of these processes, and I look forward to discussing future engagements with you later in this meeting and over the coming months. Next slide. And now let's talk about the current timeline. This slide shows the dates I anticipate taking code updates to City Council through the first 6 months of 2024. I'm going to preface this timeline by stating that as with so much of our work, the timeline is ever evolving. Literally, I got an email 30 minutes before this meeting requesting we change one of these dates. So it's always changing. Additionally, in January, we expect to be adding a page to our website for easier access and tracking on the code updates for both you and the community. The current timeline was created with an eye to balance a few often competing priorities, such as timing the alignment of updates with Bureau updates to limit the number of times a code section goes before council, ensuring that complicated titles are given the time and attention necessary, both for good drafting and for public engagement, ensuring that titles which are required to go to a board or a commission before City Council have the time to do so, and recognizing that 2024 is an election year, which means that we have some limits on commissioners' time to engage with or champion updates related to the bureaus they currently oversee. Additionally, we have concerns around logistic considerations, such as August is typically a month when we have very limited numbers of council meetings. And lastly, we have a recognition that there's a big interplay between all of these titles. An edit in one section may cause ripple effects in other titles, so we have to sequence them in a way that makes sense for those updates. It's a challenging balance of priorities to navigate, but one which hopefully will end with a better, more cohesive city code. You'll notice that 2 titles, 5 and 3, are bold. This is because we've already identified the need for your help with these titles. They are titles most directly connected with updates to the city organizational chart. And sadly, over the years, both of these titles have become the kitchen sinks of code. Figuring out which bits of code should be moved to more appropriate sections of the code, or which should be removed entirely and put in administrative policy, as well as what new language needs to be drafted to reflect both the charter amendments, the city organizational chart, and also ensuring that these are clear and understandable for community members, will require a robust public education and engagement process. So I'm hoping to be able to use your expertise in this. Next slide. This slide shows the updates for the second half of 2024. In July and August, we anticipate bringing bundles of titles, which, if they have any updates at all, will be very straightforward. Most of these updates involve simple things like switching commissioner in charge to the appropriate authority, such as the mayor or the city council. Title 17, Public Improvements, is scheduled for December of 2024. And it's late in the year because we anticipate a few state updates being released in October of 24. And so we are partnering with the bureau responsible for that title to ensure that both their updates and charter related updates go at the same time. The city auditor's office has of tomorrow's meeting, hopefully we'll have completed most of the updates to Title II legislation and elections. Except for an update to the lobbying chapter, which they anticipate bringing to council late in the spring. And again, we're probably not going to step on their toes since the auditor is official. And lastly, our city attorney's office has determined that Title 34, Digital Justice, requires no updating. Next slide. Oops. Skip too many slides. So Title 15, emergency code updates, are anticipated to be brought before council at the February 21st, 2024 City Council meeting. This title lays out all the ways in which emergencies can be declared, the length of time that emergency declarations can take place, and what powers or authorities the city has in an emergency. To ensure that our updates to this code meet national best practices, we work directly with the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management, also known as PBEM, reviewed Oregon state laws, FEMA requirements and recommendations, language used in codes from a whole host of other cities such as Seattle, Denver, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and Milwaukee, just to name a few. There were two policy choices we are suggesting be made in the update. The first is that the mayor, as the head of the executive branch, be the authority for declaring an emergency. This is because emergencies require urgent, coordinated efforts by city bureaus and personnel. And it's typical for the head of a city administration, in this case, the mayor, to be the declaring official. However, we are also proposing that council will have the authority to extend an emergency declaration beyond either the 22 initial day declaration or the allowable 2-week renewals the mayor can do. If the mayor is unable to declare an emergency, code will also outline a rather long list of city officials who can step into that role, starting with the mayor's chief of staff and working through bureau directors in a pretty thoughtful order. The second policy choice we made is that after the initial 21-day emergency declaration, the mayor can extend that declaration in 2-week increments unless the council, by ordinance, extends or ends the emergency declaration. This time limit does not apply to housing emergencies or shelter shortages, which remain unchanged in the code and may be declared for 1 year by council with an extension allowable for up to 3-year increments. I want to note that we're not making any changes to Title V related to the housing or shelter shortage. While the need to declare emergencies to get bureaus to work together won't exist as often in the new form of government due to all of the bureaus reporting to the city administrator and ultimately the mayor, we do recognize that many of the current activities related to the housing emergency are authorized under this code, and so do not want to remove or alter significantly those sections until both the Bureau of Emergency Management and Housing Bureau are able to come to agreement that the housing emergency declaration language can be removed from code. The full draft language for updates to Title 15 will be posted to our website, hopefully in the next 2 weeks, but no later than the first week of January. Thank you, Janice, for your public comment on this. I'm requesting that review and comments be completed by January 19th in order to have time to consider and incorporate any updates into the final version scheduled to be presented to council on February 21st. Also noted Janice's request regarding identification of programs which have been created under this code. Next slide. As we move forward with code updates, help am I looking for from this commission? I'm the first to admit that I am not great with public engagement. I would appreciate recommendations on how best to educate and engage Portlanders, particularly on Title III and V, as we discussed earlier. What can we learn from our previous code update processes? How can we do better? How can we keep the public informed on the timeline, the language proposed, and the opportunities available for input? I would also very much appreciate your assistance in educating and engaging Portlanders on these updates. And finally, I know many of you have expertise or experience in the areas outlined in the Portland City Code. I would love your keen attention and input on code section draft language when they are important to you. Next slide. That's the end of my presentation. So I'm going to hand it back to Leah for facilitation of the discussion or questions.
Great. Thank you so much for the detailed presentation. I know we all appreciate it. I'm going to say we have about 5 minutes for questions. We're not going to be able to get to everything here. I already see a number of hands raised. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have each of you state your question. If there's time for any answers, we'll use that now. We do have a tight agenda though, so we're not going to go past 6:50. After the meeting, Julia will make sure that we have Diana's contact information so that any emails can be sent directly with that. So with that, I'm just going to go in order. Again, please just say your question. Try to take 1 minute or less. So Fred.
I just, it seems like a subcommittee was in order for this to help Diane and the staff through this because it's a comprehensive revision of the code. That's all I've got to say, other than there's some big things coming up, like a permitting process and a report from different agencies about natural areas and how they coordinate. I'm assuming that as the council deliberates on these big issues between now and December 30, when they'll be accommodating those.
Correct.
Those decisions, right. Good luck.
Thank you, Fred.
To help. I've done codes, many state and local, so I can help.
Thank you. We'll note the idea for a subcommittee. Juliet, I'm going to hand it to you.
So slide 11 talks about removing sexist language. Will there be any proactive gender equity language added?
Question. I think mostly we're making it as neutral as possible instead of a she or a her or a him. It's pretty much,
Gender neutral.
yeah, the mayor or a person.
Them.
Just
Very
my
neutral.
opinion that Portland is woefully behind comparable cities in having gender equity and gender justice programs. I have examples of those.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. And again, we're just going to collect questions for now so everyone gets heard. Bill, I got you up next.
Thank you, Leah. Diana, you specifically solicited review or evaluation by GTAC on titles 3 and 5. Can you be sure to facilitate that review by alerting us when drafts are available or telling us what you and your colleagues can do to make sure that we're aware and can engage? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. And Zach, I'm going to hand it over to you finally.
Zach Curl, him, and I just would say, Code 3 is Title 3, especially like, giving some foreshadowing of what areas within the chapter or within the title, because I know I've had conversations in neighborhoods and deep interest in the changes of 3.96. So early and often, I think, in broadcasting that.
Thank you. Okay. And we do have 2 minutes left if you want to take on any of these questions right now, Tina.
I can tell you Title 3 is likely going to be a full rewrite. And so we will be bringing more information to you as we establish what will go into Title 3. Partner is very necessary.
Thank you. Amy, I see you snuck in there.
Yeah, this is probably the case, but can you share out the answers to these questions?
I will make sure that Julia gets them.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any final questions they want to ask during the meeting?
More.
You got one more, Fred. Go for it.
Yeah, it's because the council's already adopted this resolution that they'll go with these 6 new service areas, and there's this lateral thing, and we've got these siloed, if you will, sections to the code, if not the charter, that let's leave the charter aside, but looking at the code and are you going to be attempting to line those up?
Correct.
As best we know, knowing that there's future improvements down the road that the new council will be tackling in 2025.
Yeah, and that's part of the Title 3 rewrite, because that's all the administration that outlines what bureaus do,
Okay.
what they have authority for. And so we will be aligning that to the organizational chart the best that we can, recognizing that future changes may occur.
I think that's important to know. Yeah, thanks.
Great. We have 1 minute left. Terry, why don't you say your question? We won't have time to answer it, but it can be in public record then.
Yeah, okay. So this is a personal pet peeve gripe, but the plain language revisions that y'all are doing, I don't like them. And as somebody who taught drafting in law school, I think you're doing it wrong. You should retain the word shall instead of replacing it because shall tends to mean legally a duty to do. Okay. And I think you're making the code worse by using will and must. And that's just a drafting tip from a adjunct law professor. And you can take that back to the law department and have them write me a memo on that.
We'll have time in 2025 for that because I swamped them as it is. Thank you, Terry, though.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks, everyone, for that. I think we've got everyone's questions covered. We'll make sure all the answers are sent out. Zay, I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Sorry, just really quick. Jane put in the chat, we only have 2 mics tonight and they're kind of on opposite sides. So I think folks can probably hear us and maybe a few of you well. And those of you over there, we might have to either slide down a mic when you want to speak or if you can try to speak up. We'll see how that goes. Yeah, if you mind.
Trade places here.
I got it.
Thank you. Hopefully that'll fix things a little bit, but please do let us know if there's still sound. This is a reminder, we're gonna have a special meeting on December 18th on the transition budget. Just on the budget. You know, today we have helped to answer questions posed at last meeting's expense discussion. And share some additional information to help us prepare for this special meeting. So I'll turn it over to Shannon Fairchild.
Everybody, thanks for having me. Shannon Fairchild, she, her pronouns off. She, her pronouns, Office of Management and Finance. So I'm working on the charter transition, the budget aspect of all things charter transition. So could you go to the next slide? So thanks for entertaining me as I have not done a presentation, not looking at my notes, like exclusively online in a while. So thank you for that. It's a new challenge. It's a stretch assignment. So I am sure everyone on this committee has been involved in budget in some way, shape, or form, whether it's here or in some other capacity. But whether it's your first time or your 15th time, I always think it's a good idea to start with looking at a calendar, which we have here, as well as thinking about the budget in terms of different phases, the different focuses that occur throughout the year. So the city, just to ground everybody, the city practices an annual budget process. We are on a fiscal year, July to June. That is the way the city operates. Its fiscal processes. Right now, we are in the kind of what is the preparation phase / requested phase. The preparation phase are when we start really thinking about next year's adopted budget and how we want to allocate our resources. That really starts in earnest in late summer, early fall. And so given that we are really in kind of a transition period where we're thinking about next year in terms of how we currently exist in a bureau structure to moving towards a new form of government, we kind of have to toggle these 2 different worlds, both from like a technical perspective as well as just a policy perspective. So I do want to bring up kind of 2 things that have happened in the last month that are significant, and they have context to charter transition. So the first is there was a resolution that passed November 1st. That was the resolution of the new org structure that included elements directly related to charter transition, as well as other elements that are just more general to organizational changes that the project sponsors wanted to include in the resolution. So that passed on November 1st. There was no appropriation that went with that resolution. It was just a resolution that said, here is the proposed structure. Fast forward a couple weeks, there was this just passed last week, what is called a current appropriation level ordinance. That is a ordinance that actually appropriated funds to the foundational pieces of the charter reform structure. So that includes the city administrator. It includes the assistant city administrator, includes council offices, so one staff per council member, as well as staff and 5 staff and the mayor. So that is kind of the core piece that happened that passed last week. And in doing so, that allows, it gives like the foundational appropriation that we can start building the budget. There are other pieces of the resolution that passed on November 1st that just were not funded as part of that CAL ordinance. Just working with the city budget office, those will come forward as part of the requested budget process, either aspects of it or part of it. We're still kind of looking for the city budget office's guidance on how those different pieces of the org chart can actually make their way through the process. So, and that kind of leads me to the other thing here that you'll see here around the mayor's budget guidance that was released a couple weeks ago. Unfortunately, I'm speaking for myself. It's a 2-part guidance. So there's some critical details that we need that we're still waiting for. But the first part of the guidance really lays out the general fund policy direction that the mayor wants to go. And so that includes prioritizing charter transition as well as other priorities. So kind of like the kind of key pieces as you're thinking about GTAC's budget for next year, just that are included and outlined in the first memo. It's just that it did talk at length about kind of the fiscal. We're just in a different financial situation than we were a few years ago. We're not forecasting new, ongoing, or one-time resources. So in memo 2 that is forthcoming and will come out around December 15th, it will actually identify cut targets that bureaus will need to match in order to balance their budget. So we're looking at a situation in which revenues are projected to be flattening and expenses are exceeding those revenues. So we need to make some reductions. We don't know the percentage cut we'll need to make. We do know that in the memo number 1, that public safety will be held harmless from those reductions. They won't be subject to reductions. So that was stated in the memo. So other than that, we're kind of in a just wait and see. So the next piece, and because we're kind of in a wait and see, we're in just a different spot than we normally would be. We'd be a little bit farther along this time of year. But luckily, the city budget office gave us a little bit more time to put together our budgets. And so they will be due February 15th. And they will also look a little bit different than they have in previous years, where we've been asked to submit budgets at the service area. So if you, and I can put it in the notes, but the service areas, it reflects the November 1st resolution of the new city org chart. So there's the budget and finance service area, city operations, parks, community safety, et cetera. So we'll be submitting budgets in that format. Whereas before, every bureau, all 20+ bureaus would submit their budgets that way. So it's going to look a little different, just to kind of give some context there. And so once bureaus submit the requested budget, we'll go through the mayor's proposed phase. This will include work sessions, public engagement. City budget office is developing their public engagement plan, so I don't have that to share at this point. The mayor's proposed budget will be released in May 2nd. That's a legally binding date. We have to do it by then. And at that point, that if the commissioners want to amend the mayor's proposed budget, that happens in the approved and sometimes in the adopted phase. And so that's when you're going to start seeing them. You'll start hearing discussions about amendments, and that's when they can occur. There's public hearings for all 3 of those phases, and we have to pass a budget by June 30th. We're not like the feds where we can do a continuing resolution. It has to happen for us to levy taxes and function as a city. Sure. Okay. Okay, so that's just kind of the background for what to be aware of over the next couple months. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so over the past, I think I was here the previous meeting, we presented a similar chart. And it included cost estimates instead of actual budget. And so I want to move towards just presenting what's actually in the budget this year. So to go through this, again, there's a kind of think about the budget in three pieces. The first piece is the transition project management and administration. So that includes the people that you all see here. It's consulting support, community engagement, voter education, advisory bodies. That is funded with general fund one-time resources. To date, we've spent about $2.4 million. That includes some funding that was spent in the previous fiscal year, but our budget for this year for that body of work is approximately $5.4 million. The other pot of resources is for facilities. So that's for council chambers, council workspaces, mayor and city administrator workspaces. That is funded out of a combination of general fund as well as non-general fund resources. So things like PBOT and Bureau of Developmental Services, they all pay a portion of that over the next 7 years. So the total cost there is $7.2 million, but it will be repaid over time. And then the next piece is policy set aside. So that is $3.1 million that was set aside in this current year budget in the fall to address any resource needs related to charter transition. And it will most likely not be spent this year, but it will be carried over to next year. So that was just an attempt to take some resources and to help pay for costs that come up next year, given the forecast that we're unlikely to have new one-time resources for next year. So that it just kind of, it's almost like it's a fund balance that will be used for next year's transition costs. What is BUMP? The BUMP, good question. Sorry for the acronyms. The BUMP is 2 times a year, the city opens their budget to changes. It's called the supplemental budget management process. And so we can amend the budget. And so in the fall, we forecasted some additional resources and we said, the city budget office wanted to grab that to set aside for charter transition. And so that money was appropriated at that time. Whatever's not spent next year or this year will be carried over to next year. So that's really important because given that we are in a different financial situation than we were in previous years, the underspending will be really important to fund next year. Okay. Next slide. So we had questions when I was here last time around how much has been spent on community engagement and community bodies. So we went through and itemized the actuals to date. So this is last year's actuals related to expenses that directly related to the IDC or the Independent District Commission, the Salary Commission, the Government Transition Advisory Committee, as well as interpretation and translation services that supported all of those advisory bodies, as well as stipends that supported all 3 of those. And so as you see here, we have, we took all those categories and you can see the actuals for last year, the year-to-date actuals, as well as the budget for this year. So I just want to get you that information as someone did request it. So, yeah. Okay. You want me to?
The end of your presentation?
Yeah, I'm happy to take. I figured there'd be questions. There was a lot here, so I wanted to leave time.
I just didn't want to cut you off.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
Before we do take questions, comments, I do want to remind folks that for the December 18th meeting, we'll have an agenda. It'll be just a budget. We haven't set that agenda yet. So if you have any specific questions or specific topics on the budget you want to see covered, please put it in the chat. And then the co-chairs and the staff will make sure to look at those and try to implement them into the agenda. But if anyone has any questions, please raise your hands and we'll start with it.
If this is too broad to answer question, just let me know that. But you said that there's big changes as far as forecasting revenue for the next few years. So can you just speak to those changes? Like, what is the city thinking about? What affects those? Or is there steps where we could get more information about that?
Yes, so I am taking my information from the budget memo, and so we can provide a link to that. But the city has a city economist who does forecasting for all the revenue sources as well as expenses. So, or general fund, the sources of revenue that make up the general fund. And so if you're happy to give you his contact information, but by and large, the takeaway that was described in the memo was that our revenues are flattening. We're in a different environment than a few years ago when we had CARES resources. Our one-time resources were really fluctuating a lot, and we're in a different environment now.
Before it, Fred, Bill, did you have a question? I saw your hand go up and down.
Oh, you're on mute.
A very quick eye, Jose. Thank you. I was typing it in chat, but perhaps at the December 18 meeting, perhaps one can give some guidance as to how GTAC members can review the budget and provide meaningful feedback. At least just speaking from a personal viewpoint, if I see an overall figure at $7 million or something, is that enough? Is it not enough? Is it determined? If I look for a particular program like 45,000 for GTAC, how do I break that down, or how do I readily break that down to try to provide some useful feedback? Thanks. I don't expect you to necessarily answer that right now, but as December 18 approaches.
Right.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Zay. Oops. I guess stay on mute, then use the.
There's a speaker right in front of you.
Okay, because the speaker's right there. All right. Thank you, Diane. I'm looking forward to the presentation later in the month, but I'm wondering about just possible cost savings and how you take them into account if we're going to have deputy city administrators starting next July 1. And let's say the PBOT director is a good candidate for being the deputy administrator in transportation. Wow. And so what does that do to having a bureau director then? And same with the other 26 to 25 bureaus. And they all have managers or directors. They're at will. Mm-hmm. And many of them probably get qualified to be deputy administrators, either acting or appointed in 2025. How does the budget take into, considering limited resources, is there any way to take into account possible savings of those kind of infill or job rotation aspects?
So the budget office has been pretty clear that it has those. So you gave the example of the deputy city administrator, that those would have to be funded via a realignment. So kind of doing what you're suggesting, taking an existing position, whether it's vacant or someone's in it, and moving it to the deputy city administrator's office, because there's no new resources to fund it. So that is what the direction is. We'll find out exactly what all of that entails in budget memo 2, but that's exactly what the overarching guidance has been, is that we need to think creatively about the existing resources to fund those types of positions.
Yeah.
Juliet, I am she, her pronouns. I'm assuming that if we have district offices for district offices and provide security and so forth, that's not gonna be a big budget consideration. Is that?
I don't know, because I don't think they have a budget for those yet, so I can't say.
I had a clarifying question on the response to Fred's question. So was it just in the case of which there was a lateral transition of, say, a bureau director to a deputy, or are all these like kind of what you're calling the base appropriation of staffing that we see in the org chart all directed to have this kind of like structural realignment, or however we phrased it, where it's essentially already appropriated money. It's not creating a new budget, because we're getting questions. Jump back and say we're getting questions about like how are you going to fund all these new positions, and I think what I'm looking for is clarity that the answer is it's really just realignment of the existing resources of staff in City Hall and elsewhere.
So for council, the mayor's office, the city administrator, the executive assistant of the city administrator, that all received appropriation. So that the money that is going to go to fund those positions is going to come from a reduction that we will know the percentage of in the next memo. So the way that they're funding those positions is through a reduction. So that's just for like the along with other things, like there's a lot of other things beyond charter transition that the mayor wants to fund. And so the reduction the resources that will be generated from that will fund the kind of the core piece of charter reform that was passed in the Cal, that's $2.4 million number. But there's other things too, that like they need to generate resources above and beyond 2.4 million to fund his priorities. So, but I don't have that number. That number will come out soon. To your question about, so it's a little fuzzy between the resolution that passed on November 1st and all like the different positions that were in that. And then how to fund all of those, because that the current appropriation ordinance that just passed didn't include those, a ton of those positions, right? Not a ton, but a lot of the positions. Deputy city administrators being one of them, assistant city administrators being one of them. The guidance, as I understand it so far, is going to be that you're going to have to use existing resources to fund those if you want to do that. So if you want to take that org chart that passed on November 1st, it's all got to come from existing resources. So that means getting creative with vacancies, moving things around. There's not going to be additional resources to fund those. So whether it's a whether it's director to fund XYZ, like we're not in the situation of being that specific yet. We're not quite there. Yeah.
Yeah. From the comments, I think it'd be better to like have a follow-up of what reduction specifically means, because reduction is like a lot of staff from PBOT being like,
yeah,
but that's probably not what you mean. So,
and to clarify, thank you for that question. It's general fund. So PBOT has a little bit of general fund, but they have their own operating fund because they have their own parking meter funds, and like they have their own fund. So their reductions, if they do make them, I'm not the PBOT analyst, and I apologize, I've not been following it very closely, would not be related to the kind of restrict the target that we're going to be seeing here in a week or two, like because it's a different fund source that's funding PBOT from the general fund.
it's probably more clarity on how we are funding this then. But the reason I raised my hand was following Juliet's question of like, at what point does GTAC get to, like, if we wanted to put in a recommendation for budgeting district offices, like what do you see as a potential opportunity for that?
So we definitely let's talk about it more on the 18th. But the kind of the points are, so this is also a period, the entry points to kind of talk about that would be during the mayor's proposed phase. And there's also, so you can reach out at any time, really. But first we need the numbers to understand kind of what the physical implications are of district offices, which I think Maddie and her team are working on. And my understanding is if they do those, they'll come forward as part of the budget process. And so at that point, you can provide testimony at like the proposed hearing, or adopted or approved. So that would be like the formal way of doing it. But then there's also just other kind of meetings or letters, or there's different ways to do it. But to get on the record, it would be to provide testimony at the proposed or approved or adopted.
Could we do it beforehand, sorry, as well, since they're already working on it?
Well, we don't, so they have to request, like, they're still trying to figure out what the costs are. And so we'll see. Yeah, we're not quite there yet. Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, thank you for putting things in the chat. If there's no further question, I'll pass it on to Rita.
Excellent. You. Okay. Switching gears now. We'll go back to the budget on the 18th, but for now, we want to receive our first subcommittee reports. Before I do that, though, I want to check in with folks that are remote tonight. Are people able to hear? We shifted the mics around a little bit. Are you able to hear people better? I see one thumbs up. Okay, well, we're doing our best over here. Thanks for bearing with us. Okay, back to subcommittee reports then. One purpose of the reports today is for the full committee to vote on the subcommittee overviews. Bill and I are going to provide the voter and candidate education and outreach subcommittee report first. Next slide, please. Okay. So there are 11 committee members that serve on the voter and candidate education and outreach subcommittee. The subcommittee plans to meet for 14 months, which would mean until January 2025. I'm going to pass it over to Bill now, who's going to review the key components of our subcommittee's overview. So next slide, please. And Bill, it's yours.
Well, yes, thank you, Leah. And let's focus on three portions of the subcommittee overview. And for convenience, if you wish to, if you look at the whole document, posted a link to it. But we'll focus on the committee charge, the timeline and scope of work, and then 3, voting and decision making. Now, here is the charge, and I'll read it. The subcommittee is charged with reporting to and developing recommendations for the full committee on voter and candidate education and outreach. Specifically, to advise on voter education strategy, including co-developing existing channel strategy. 2, advise on voter education budget. 3, review, share, and utilize educational materials to support implementation of outreach and education in a coordinated way across the city. 4, we will seek to review and advise on proposed changes to the elections code and rules. 5, we'll seek to recommend approaches for candidate training. And 6, report feedback from the public about ranked choice voting. And we'll do this, we develop ideas, it's only with full committee approval. And also with your approval, we can address additional topics. Next slide, please, Leah, or June, or Julia. Second subject, timeline. This is also verbatim from the the overview. Timeline and scope of work. We've begun reviewing the voter education strategy In January and February, we're going to look at the voter education budget. In the spring, we'll look at candidate training approaches. And in the summer to November, with the elections, we'll review, share, utilize educational materials. Finally, after November and up to the election, we'll try to provide evaluation of how our education outreach worked out. Next slide, Leah. And our third major section is for voting and decision making. And this is how we're aiming to function. Like a quorum is a simple majority of the committee members, and all of the committee members plus alternates can vote. But if a committee member is not a member of the subcommittee, not vote, but as alternates for the full committee, your voice can be heard. So please join and speak up. And we'll require a simple majority to conduct business, and seek consent, consensus. But if you can't seek consensus, it'll be by majority vote. And we will not vote by absentee and proxy voting. So that highlights the three major points of the overview document. And now, Leah, back to you.
Thanks, Bill. One thing I realized I don't think I stated that was probably emailed to make clear, Bill and I are co-chairing that voter education subcommittee, which is why we're talking tonight about it. So next slide, please. I'm going to do a quick subcommittee status update for y'all. The subcommittee has met twice so far. At our first meeting, we discussed and approved the subcommittee overview and had a train the trainer session. At our second meeting, we appointed the first co-chair rotation, Bill and I, followed up on the train the trainer session, and reviewed the voter education work plan and proposed budget. Our third meeting is scheduled for January 9th. Between meetings, the subcommittee members are reviewing and providing feedback on the draft voter education plan. In January, we expect to begin reviewing and providing feedback on educational materials. And I want to take a minute now to ask if any of the subcommittee members want to add anything that Bill and I may have missed to recap our past two meetings. I'll wait a sec to see if there are any hands.
I just.
Ed.
Yeah, at the end of the discussion of our meetings, the outreach campaign was discussed, and in addition to what I can discern from the contract between the city of Portland and the United Way, the term "get out the vote" is also added. And get out the vote, to those of us who have worked both sides of campaigns and elections, usually is a term used by the proponents of something, political parties, unions, PACs, candidates and their campaigns. And so that raised some questions that I think that the subcommittee will have to delve into a little further, because it's unusual to have a get out the vote campaign funded by public entities like the city of Portland.
Fred. Would anyone else from the committee like to offer anything? I saw in the chat that Zach noted on the 9th, the time that we're meeting, 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. You're welcome to listen into that. Also, for those that haven't, if you have a minute to look back at the Train the Trainer session that we did during our first meeting, it was incredibly helpful in terms of talking about ranked choice voting, which is something that all of us committee-wide are talking about in our presentations. And so I think everyone would find it helpful. With that, one more call to see if anyone has anything to share.
We'll say real quick that I worked on numerous nonprofits whose whole job is just to get more people registered to vote.
Absolutely.
Especially young people.
Yeah.
And they also call it get out the vote.
Okay.
So I think everyone just calls it get out the vote. I worked with one in Georgia and they're very specific. You can't talk about partisan anything.
Right.
And it's still called get out the vote.
Here we call it a voter registration drive.
Yeah.
Get more voters.
I think language always is changing.
Yeah.
People are using different stuff. Yeah, I agree with Jose from my experience. But Amy, I see your hand.
I know that the next meeting isn't until January 9th, but a number of different things have come up regarding the contractors or the contracted organizations, both internal dialogue from our committee and then this public comment we saw today. And I just wanted to see if this is something we could speak about as a group, or there's some way we can kind of speak about that in a public way, because this is something that kind of keeps coming up, and I haven't seen it kind of addressed as specifically addressing the concerns that have been raised.
I don't have a specific answer to that.
Yeah, I don't know.
To say.
This one is a big issue because it's come up a number of times, and it seems like something we should probably work to address together.
Definitely. I feel confident. I'm looking heavily in Julia's direction saying this, that it will be something that's discussed committee-wide and there will be more information provided. I don't know what that will look like or when. Is that accurate? Is that vague and accurate? Okay, great. Jose, I'm going to hand it over to you now to facilitate any other questions.
Okay, well, Terry, everybody stand up, Terry.
Yeah, I had the sort of the same comment. My understanding is that Sophia from the voter education campaign effort with the city staff is going to get back to us with more information on the contracting and the framing of that. I have the exact same concerns that the commenter earlier had, and it'd be good to get complete clarity as to how that's going to work and what the understandings are, so that we can explain it to people. So, thanks.
Are there any other questions on the subcommittee's work? Okay. Seeing none, we do have to vote to approve the subcommittee's overview. Are there any questions or comments on the subcommittee's overview before I entertain a motion to approve it?
Move.
Move. We have second.
I'll second.
Great. Oh. Lee? Lenny, go ahead.
Question.
Go ahead.
So I don't know if this, if there can be an amendment, but this is going to be for both overviews. If there could be some language around managing the part of the work plan that this is associated with, and just iterating on that as the committee is working through their timeline. I see a lot of things were pulled from the work plan, some things were not. So just wanting those two documents to be working in partnership is the request.
Okay. We'll make sure that that takes it, take into consideration with the work that the committee is doing. We have to amend. We have a motion on the floor to approve this overview. We feel that we need to change it to say it has to.
Didn't hear what the.
We have the motion to approve the overview. There's been a request that there'd be more time with the work plan. You guys feel like that has to be an amendment or a separate? Yeah.
I didn't catch quite the
Yeah.
speaker. It makes it hard for me to understand everything that Bonnie said, but she wants to elongate the work plan or just add.
I
but I'm
believe the
not sure.
proposal was that we make it clear that the subcommittee charge will operate in tandem with the work plan, that as it is currently, not everything in the work plan is outlined in the subcommittee description. And so we'll make sure that we're constantly checking back, or not constantly, consistently checking the work plan.
I don't think that's a necessary amendment. That's just something the co-chairs and staff will take care of, I'm sure. Destiny and Zach as we proceed. Yeah.
Okay.
And is that okay? Are you comfortable with that, Bonnie?
Let me. Fred, you propose the motion.
Yes.
So if you could amend your motion to say that that will happen.
Oh, well.
It'll be a friendly amendment.
Okay, sure. I mean, that'll happen. And I accept that as a friendly amendment, but it happened.
We still have a second.
Coordination between the GTAC's overall work plan and the subcommittee schedules.
Perfect. So we're approving the subcommittee overview with the friendly amendment that we ensure that all the pieces of review will get assigned a piece of the work plan going forward. Do we have any objections, or could everyone raise your hand if you approve? Seeing no objections, overview passes.
Would it be okay if I made a quick comment? I do want to make a quick comment to that, just to make sure that everyone feels comfortable about our work in relation to the work plan on this. Because I realize not everyone sits in the co-chair meetings. So ever since we approved the work plan, Julia has made sure that every single piece of every single agenda item is coded so that it relates to everything in the work plan. And that is true not just in these full committee meetings, but in each of the subcommittee meetings too. And that the co-chairs are tracking it, but more so, I want to give credit where credit due. Like Julia is constantly making sure that we're actually in alignment with our work plan.
Hey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. That helps.
Great. And now I'll turn it over to, next slide, please. Now I'm going to turn it over to Julia and Zach to provide the districts and council operations subcommittee report.
I should probably go sit by the mic.
Well, we could move it down.
You get the first slide though. First slide. June, if we could move to the next slide.
Okay.
So the districts and council operations subcommittee has 9 committee members. The subcommittee plans to meet approximately 1 year or until October 2024. And Juliet will speak more to the charge, timeline, scope of work. Go for it.
Few technical difficulties here this evening.
The speaker, that's
Yeah, no, I have it right here. I just have slide numbers on. Sorry about that. So I'll start by first reviewing the subcommittee charge. The subcommittee is charged with reporting to and developing recommendations for the full committee on districts and council operations. The subcommittee will consider fiscal responsibility in its work. Subcommittee's charge specifically includes 1, future council and district operations, including committee structure and procedure, recommendations for standing committees, and how public input is received in a council committee meeting. 2, future council districts and offices, including the role of council districts and offices, including exploring expectations, district office outreach to the community, and constituent relations work. This advice and feedback will help inform future budget choices for funding council offices. 3, onboarding of new council members, and it will recommend the schedule of initial topics for work sessions. With the full committee's approval, the subcommittee may choose to address additional topics. Yeah, I have the slideshow here. I just can't see it and who's on Zoom, at the same time. It's fine.
I'll let you know if there's questions.
Next slide, please. We agreed to the following timeline and scope of work. From November 2023 to January of 2024, we will collect and evaluate data and information. From February to March of 2024, we'll gather input. From April to May of 2024, we'll draft initial council and district operations recommendations and final onboarding recommendations. In June of 2024, we'll disseminate initial council and district operations recommendations. In July and August, we'll gather more input on council and district operations recommendations. And in September, we'll finalize the recommendations to council, the recommendations about council and district operations. The timeline will be updated to include facilities for in-district offices when it is available. Next slide, please. For voting and decision-making, we want to highlight that the subcommittee clarified that only subcommittees may vote. Committee members who are not on the subcommittee do not vote. So the content of the voting and decision-making is the quorum for the subcommittees is a simple majority of the number of subcommittee members. All subcommittee members may vote, including alternates. Committee members who are not in the subcommittee do not vote. Subcommittees require a simple majority to conduct business, and subcommittees will use modified consensus decision-making. If a consensus cannot be reached, the affirmative vote of a simple majority of those present, that's 50% plus one, will prevail, and a roll call vote will be taken with minutes reflecting each member's position. And absentee and proxy voting is prohibited. We also agreed that alternates can vote on the subcommittee. And I'll turn it back to Zach for our final slide. Next slide, please.
Great. So giving you a little bit of a status update on what we've done to date. We've met once on Monday, November 13th. And in that first meeting, we approved what we just presented to you today, the subcommittee charge. We also received an overview of decisions or pending decisions already made by the city that relate to our work, which includes the council approved amended code 3.02, council approved city organizational structure, some staffing and facility improvements. And we also heard what progress the transition team has made on the new subcommittee's scope of work, including some thinking on future council operations and onboarding and data that was collected to date. Our next meeting is going to be scheduled is scheduled for next week on Tuesday, December 12th from 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. And between the meetings, we've been quite a bit at work. The subcommittee members have been tasked to collect data on other cities revolving around questions that were posed by the transition team. Those included details about the council standing committees of those cities and information like how many council members sit on each committee and if there are term limits. We also looked at how public input is received in these committees. We've been looking at general takeaways from watching committee sessions, innovative onboarding practices or trainings we've been able to obtain, and whether the cities in question have in-district offices, and if so, how those offices are being used. I believe we are, I think, done with this presentation, and I just want to open it up for if there's any additional information from our subcommittee that you'd like to add to our presentation. Well, hearing none, opening it up to the larger committees, are there any questions that we have before we vote on this committee's overview?
Like,
Mani has their hand raised. Go ahead.
Just another minor edit in the charge, just putting council committees so it doesn't get confused with GTAC or this subcommittee. I think just that descriptor could be made a bit clearer.
Sure, that makes sense. Thanks, Mani. Fred, you have your hand raised.
well, yeah, it looked like finalizing onboarding materials. It was like very soon, right, this spring. And isn't that for newly elected council members to onboard them after the election? I'm just thinking that's ambitious when you got so many other things perhaps to do. I don't know whether you would want to finalize it or not. It might help to hear from candidates, generally survey them after the filing deadline or opening filing date, to see how many are there and what they think they need to know. And that would not be a bad idea to ask them, just so they could be thinking about what they don't know as they run for this position.
And my recollection serves, I can't remember which subcommittee this was spoken to, but there are several presentations ready for interested candidates beginning of this year. And so there will hopefully be opportunity there to learn a little bit about what questions they might have. And so I think that's a really good recommendation and suggestion that we can, as a subcommittee, put forward to the auditor's office and suggestions of soliciting questions on what they might like to have in their onboarding documents so that we can hold to that ambitious timeline and still solicit real feedback. Any other questions? That was a great one. Thanks. Okay, I will pass it back to you, Jose, for running the vote.
Before I facilitate to vote to approve the subcommittee's overview, like we did the last one, any other changes to the overview or comments about the overview before we take a motion? And of course, just like the last one, we will make sure that the work plan is identified in the agenda, just like we have to do it. We'll consider that part of the motion from the beginning last time. Anything else? Okay. Do I have a motion? Second? Second. Okay. Everyone, please raise your hand if you'd like to approve the motion. Any objections? Seeing none? Motion carries. Thank you. And now we'll pass it over to Leah.
Excellent, thank you. Before I get on with the next steps, I want to apologize because I rushed us through talking about code updates, thinking that we weren't going to have that much time for it. So I just want to take another second to say first, sorry for cutting people off. I didn't realize that all of this time at the end. If you do have questions, please put them in chat or email. Again, we'll make sure that there's plenty of time for questions to be answered with that. But with that, I'm going to move on to next steps really quickly. First, as always, any questions not answered during the meeting will receive answers in writing and be posted online. The recording of this meeting will be posted on the committee's website and is available after the meeting ends on the Office of Management and Finance YouTube channel. The second meeting of the District and Council Operations Subcommittee is on December 12th. We have a special committee meeting on Monday, December 18th. The third meeting of the Voter and Candidate Education and Outreach Subcommittee is January 9th. Our next regular full committee meeting is Wednesday, January 10th. So many meetings together, y'all.
Hey.
Hope you're excited. Next slide, please. Again, we're going to meet as a full committee on December 18th, just from 6 until 7 p.m., all virtually, to continue the discussion of the fiscal year 2024 to 2025 transition budget. It is a time-sensitive conversation. We hope that everyone can be there for it to build off of what we started talking about today. Then we'll meet on January 10th to receive subcommittee reports, discuss changes to the city budgeting process, and hear an update on change management and employee engagement. Also, that'll be our first time with our new co-chairs, Destiny and Zach. Our scheduled meetings are on the transition website. Next slide, please. With that, I want to thank everyone for your participation tonight. Thanks for being here. We are 15 minutes early ending. I hope you use them well this evening. And we are officially adjourned.